The King and the Corpse, Tales of the Soul's Conquest of Evil by Heinrich Zimmer and edited by Joseph Campbell. But now, is that really the one thought to be gleaned from this celebrated tale? It is certainly a trivial counsel not to become a slave to avarice. Should not something have been said about the mysterious vagaries of the fate that always brought the slippers back to their rightful owner? Some point would seem to lie in this malicious repetition of the same event and in the crescendo with which the fiendish articles affect the whole nature of their bewitched owner. And is there not some point also in the remarkable intertwining of all the people and things that play into the hands of chance in this affair? Neighbors, dog, officials, and regulations of all kinds, public baths and water systems, making it possible for chance to do its work and tie more tightly the knot of destiny. The moralist has considered only the miser who received his just deserts and the vice that developed into the fate of one who practiced it. He has treated the story as an example of the manner in which one may punish oneself by means of one's favorite bent. But to have made this point, the tale need not have been anywhere near so witty, so profound. There is nothing mysterious about morality. Abu Kasem's relationship to his slippers and his experiences with them are actually very mysterious, as dark, as fateful, and full of meaning as the ring of Polycrates. A chain of malicious accidents, but taken together they combine to form a strange configuration, just right for story-making, and the result is a tale not easily forgotten. This annoyance of the indestructible slippers that cost their owner many times their value, worth nothing in themselves, yet draining him of his fortune, this theme with its variations grows to be the proportions of a great hieroglyph, or symbol for which there should be possible many and various interpretations. Out of a series of mere chances a destiny is spun. Every effort the victim makes to put an end to his difficulty only serves to increase the snowball until it swells to an avalanche that buries him under its weight. A jokester mixes up the slippers, probably for no better reason than to gloat over the embarrassment of the miser. Chance brings them back under the house from which they had been thrown into the river. Chance hurls them into the midst of the precious bottles. Chance calls the attention of a neighbor to the miser's activity in his garden. Chance swirls the slippers into the water pipe. Chance calls the dog up onto the next door balcony and drops one of the slippers on the head of the pregnant woman who happens to be walking past. But what is it that makes these accidents so fateful? Pregnant women are always walking down the street. Other people's dogs always love to snatch other people's belongings. Water is continually running through pipes, and now and then pipes get stopped. Mislaid rubbers, exchanged umbrellas, that kind of thing happens every day without any meaningful story growing out of the harmless events. The air is filled with such minute dust particles of fate. They form the atmosphere of life and all its events. Those that made for the calamity of Abu Kasem were a mere handful among thousands. With Abu Kasem's slippers, we walk right into one of the most far-reaching of all questions concerning human life and destiny, one which India was looking straight in the face when she formulated such conceptions as karma and maya. Whatever a human being brings into direct contact with himself out of the mass of whirling atoms of possibilities fuses into a pattern with his own being. In so far as he admits that a thing concerns him, it does concern him, and if related to his deepest aims and desires, his fears, and the cloudy fabric of his thoughts, it can become an important part of his destiny. And finally, if he senses it as striking at the roots of his life, that very fact itself is his point of vulnerability. But on the other hand, and by the same token, in so far as one can break loose from one's passions and ideas and thereby become free of oneself, one is released automatically from all the things that appear to be accidental. They are sometimes too meaningful, and at other times have too much of the tinge of pertinent wit about them to deserve the hackneyed name of mere accident. They are the stuff of fate, and it would constitute a lofty, serene freedom to be released from the natural compulsion to choose from among them, to choose from among the whirling atoms of mere possibility something that should become involved with one as a possible destiny and even strike perhaps at the root of one's being. There are two mirror worlds, and the human being is between them, the world outside and the one within. They are like two Magdeburg's hemispheres between which the air has been pumped out and whose edges cling together by suction so that all the king's horses cannot pry them apart. What binds the two externally, inclination, repulsion, intellectual interest, is the reflection of an inner tension of which we are not readily aware because we are ourselves within ourselves, whether we will or no. Abu Kasem has worked on his slippers as grimly and obstinately as on his business and his fortune. He is as attached to their poverty as to his riches. They are the all-concealing mask of his prosperity, its other face. Most significant is the fact that he himself has to take all the necessary steps to get rid of them. He can leave nothing to his servants. That is to say, he cannot be parted from them. They are a fetish soaked with his demonic passion. They have drawn into themselves all the passion of his life, and that passion is the secret thing from which he cannot break away. Even while he is bent on destroying them, he is passionately bound to them. There is something of the crime passionnel about the fierce joy he takes in being alone with them as he puts them to death. And this passion is mutual. That is the great point of the story. These impish slippers are like two dogs turned loose, who after a lifetime of companionship with their master return to him again and again. He thrusts them from him, but they become independent, only to find their way back to him, and their very faithfulness develops into a kind of innocent maliciousness. Their spurned devotion takes its revenge for the treachery of Abu Kasem's attempt to divorce himself from them, the faithful guardian of his ruling passion. However one looks at it, such inanimate objects have a living role to play. Gradually, and without our knowing it, they become charged with our own tensions until finally they become magnetic and set up fields of influence that attract and hold us. The life accomplishment of a man, his social personality, the contoured mask, shielding his inner character, that is the shoes of Abu Kasem. They are the fabric of their owner's conscious personality. More, they are the tangible impulses of his unconscious, the sum total of those desires and achievements in which he parades before himself and the world, and by virtue of which he has become a social personage. They are the life sum for which he has struggled. If they have no such secret meaning, why then are they so motley, so uniquely recognizable? Why have they become proverbial and such old and trusted friends? Just as they represent to the world the whole personality of Abu Kasem and his miserliness, so they mean unconsciously to himself his greatest, most consciously cultivated virtue, his merchant's avarice. And all of this has brought the man a long way, but holds more power over him than he supposes. It is not so much that Abu Kasem possesses the virtue or vice, as that the vice or virtue possesses him. It has become a sovereign motive of his being, holding him under its spell. Suddenly his shoes begin to play tricks on him, maliciously, so he thinks, but it is not he who is playing the tricks on himself. Abu Kasem's mortification is the natural consequences of being forced to drag around with him something that he refused to relinquish at the proper time, a mask, an idea about himself that should have been shed. He is one of those who will not let themselves pass with the passing of time, but clutch themselves to their own bosom and hoard the self which they themselves have made. They shudder at the thought of the consecutive periodic deaths that open out, threshold after threshold, as one passes through the rooms of life, and which are life's secret. They cling avidly to what they are, what they were, and then at last, the worn-out personality, which should have been molted like the annual plumage of a bird, so adheres that they cannot shake it off, even when it has become for them an exasperation. Their ears were deaf to the hour when it struck, and that was long ago. In some cultures, there are sacramental formulas for putting off the old Adam, initiations demanding and causing a complete breakup of the existing mold that has bewitched and bound its wearer. He is invested with an entirely new costume, which brings him under the spell of a new magic and opens to him new paths. India, for example, has at least as an ideal formula the 4 sacred ages or stages of life: that of the student or neophyte, that of the householder, that of the hermit, and that of the pilgrim, each with its characteristic costume, means of livelihood, and system of rights and duties. The neophyte, as boy and youth, lives in chastity, submissively following the guidance of his teacher, and begs his bread. Then, sacramentally advanced into his own household, the man takes a wife and devotes himself to the duty of bringing sons into the world. He works, earns money, governs his household, and provides his dependents with food and shelter. Next, he retires to the forest, subsists on the wild food of the wilderness, no longer works, has no domestic ties or duties, and directs his whole attention inward to himself, whereas formerly his duties had been to give himself for the good of the family, the village, and the guild. Finally, as pilgrim, he quits the forest hermitage, and, free from any habitation, homeless, begs his bread as in the days of his youth, but now imparting wisdom, whereas when he then received it, nothing that he had ever had, either human companionship or worldly possessions, remains to him any more. All has gone from his hands as though only loaned to him for a while. Civilizations like that of India, founded on a cornerstone of magic, help their children through those necessary transformations that men find it hard to accomplish from within. This they do by means of undisputed sacraments. The bestowal of the special vestments, implements, signet rings, and crowns actually recreates the individual. Changes of food and the reorganization of the outer ceremonial of life make possible certain new things, certain actions and feelings, and prohibit others. They are much like commands issued to a hypnotic subject. The unconscious no longer finds in the external world the thing to which it had so long reacted, but something else, and this rouses within it new responses, so that it breaks from the hardened pattern of its past. Therein lies the great value of magic areas of life for the guidance of the soul. The spiritual powers being symbolized as gods and demons, or as images in holy places, the individual is brought into relationship with them through the procedures of the investiture, and then held to them by the new ritual routines. A perfected, unmarred, sacramental system of this kind is a mirror world which catches all of the rays sent up from the depths of the unconscious and presents them as an external reality susceptible to manipulation. The two hemispheres, the inner and the outer, then fit together perfectly, and any considered change of scenery in the tangible sacramental mirror sphere brings about, almost automatically, a corresponding shift in the interior field and point of view. The gain which the rejection of this magic conditioning has brought to the modern man are exorcism of all the demons and gods from the world, and the increase therewith in our rationally directed power over the material forces of the earth is paid for by the loss of this mirror control over the forces of the soul. The man of today is helpless before the magic of his own invisible psyche. It drives him whither it will, and from among the many possibilities of events, it perversely conjures up for him the mirage of a diabolical external reality without furnishing him with any counter-magic or any real understanding of the spell that has befooled him. We are hampered on every hand by the insufficient solutions of the great life questions. The result is a no-man's land of physical and spiritual suffering caused by the insoluble in many forms, and made excruciating by the absence of a way out. This, to unsympathetic eyes, can seem amusing, and in the realm of art is what produces comedy, works of the kind of our present comedy of Abu Kasem. Fairy tales and myths usually have a happy ending. The hero slays the dragon, frees the maiden, tames the winged horses, and wins the magic weapon. But in life such heroes are rare. The daily conversations in the bazaar, the gossip of the marketplace, and the law courts tell us a different tale. In a place of the rare miracle of success, there is the common comedy of failure. Instead of Perseus conquering the Medusa and saving Andromeda from the sea monster, we have Abu coming along in his miserable slippers. Abu Kasem is certainly the more frequent type in the everyday world. Here there is much more of tragic comedy than of mythological opera, and such gossip as surrounded Abu Kasem all his life and made him immortal as a comic figure is the mythology of the everyday. The anecdote, as the finished product of the gossip, corresponds to the myth, even though it never reaches such lofty heights. It shows the comedy of the Gordian knot, which only the magic sword of the mythical hero can cleave. And so let us change our shoes. If it were only as simple as that, unfortunately the old shoes, cherished and lovingly patched for a lifetime, always come back. So the story teaches us obstinately and persistently, even after we have finally made up our minds to discard them, and even if we take the wings of the morning and fly unto the uttermost parts of the sea, they are there with us. The elements will not accept them. The sea spews them out. The earth refuses to receive them. And before they can be destroyed by fire, they fall through the air to complete our ruin. Not even the tax collector wants them. Why should anything in the world burden itself with the full-fledged demons of our ego just because we have at last become uneasy in their presence? Who is to deliver Abu Kasem from himself? The way he sought deliverance was obviously futile. One does not get rid of one's beloved ego simply by throwing it out of the window when it has begun to play one tricks. In the end, Abu Kasem conjured the judge, at least not to hold him responsible for any future deviltries his slippers might play, but the judge only laughed at him. And will not our judge too laugh at us? We alone are responsible for this innocent, lifelong process of building our own ego. Involuntarily and lovingly, we have patched together the shoes that carry us through life, and we shall remain subject in the end to their uncontrollable compulsions. Something of this we already know from having observed the uncontrollable compulsion at work in others. For example, when we have read their unintentional gestures, it is a force that is made manifest all around us, in all kinds of spontaneous expressions, people's handwritings, failures, dreams, and unconscious images, and it has more control over a man than he himself realizes or would have anyone believe, infinitely more than his conscious will. Its ungovernable drives are the demonic horses harnessed to the chariot of our life, the conscious ego being only the driver, so that there is nothing for it but to resign oneself like Goethe's Egmont, to hold fast the reins and to steer the wheels clear, now to the left, now to the right, here from a stone, there from a precipice. Our fate first deposit itself in our lives through our innumerable tiny movements, the scarcely conscious actions and neglects of everyday life. Through our choices and rejections, it gradually thickens until the solution reaches a saturation point and it ripens for crystallization. A slight jar finally is enough, and what has long been forming as a cloudy liquid, something indefinite, merely holding itself in readiness, is precipitated as a destiny, crystal clear and hard. In the case of Abu Kasem, it was the genial mood following his successful business deal, a dizziness at the marvelous double stroke by which he had acquired the little crystal bottles and the attar of roses, that raised his opinion of himself and set the wheel of his fate in motion. He felt that things should continue in this way, with little gifts from fortune, pleasant little returns such as his thrifty and industrious life had earned for him. Look, another one. Why, Abu Kasem, you lucky dog, these luxurious slippers, and brand new in place of the old. Perhaps they have come from the critical friend who could no longer bear to see you going around in your old tatters. Abu Kasem's avarice, puffed up by his momentary good fortune, kicked over the traces a little. It would have insulted his feeling of triumph and dissipated his lofty mood to have had to come down to the idea of really putting his hand in his pocket to buy himself a new pair of shoes. He would have been able to find the old slippers in the dressing room just as the judge's slave soon found them, had he only troubled to hunt around a little in the sober but annoying suspicion that someone might have been trying to make a fool of him. Instead, he flattered himself by taking the new ones, a little dizzied and blinded by the beautiful things, for they really satisfied his unsuspected, unconscious impulses. It was a childish act of sweet self-forgetfulness, a momentary lack of self-control, but something was given expression through it which for a long time had been disregarded. Something that had been quietly growing overwhelmingly powerful was at last given its play, and the particle that swells to an avalanche was set in motion. The very same net with which Abu Kasem had fished up his shady gains in the bazaar he had now unconsciously snarled about himself, a net spun of the threads of his own avarice, and so he found himself in a pretty predicament, caught fast in the mesh of himself. What for a long time had been building within a slowly growing, threatening tension had unpredictably unloaded itself into the outer world and carried him into the clutches of the law, where he was now left to lash helplessly in a tangle of public mortification, neighborly blackmail, and trouble with the authorities. Abu Kasem's own behavior, his greedy prosperity, and his avid hoarding of himself had long been sharpening the teeth of this machinery and fitting them into place. According to the Indian formula, man sows his seed and pays no attention to its growth. It sprouts and ripens, and then each must eat the fruit of his own field. Not only our actions, but also our omissions, become our destiny. Even the things that we have failed to will are reckoned among our intentions and accomplishments, and may develop into events of grave concern. This is the law of karma. Each becomes his own executioner, each his own victim, and precisely as in the case of Abu Kasem, each his own fool. The laughter of the judge is the laughter of the devils in hell at the damned, who have uttered their own sentence and burn in their own flames. The story of Abu Kasem shows how finely woven is the net of karma, and how tough its delicate threads. Can his ego, whose demons now have him fast in their clutches, free him? Can it put itself to death? In his despair, is he not already on the very verge of the recognition that no one can relieve him of his slippers, no power on earth destroy them, but that he must in some way go about getting rid of them nevertheless? If they could only become unessential to him piece by piece as they became more valuable to him with every mending, if he could only free himself from their motley patch by patch until they were nothing but a pair of indifferent rags. It is told in the tale that the judge could not refuse Abu Kasem his boon, which means that he was no longer to be haunted by his dreadful slippers. The light of his new day, in other words, has begun to dawn. But this light could be rising ultimately from no other place but the deep crater of his own interior, which up to now has been shrouding his vision with its cloudy distillations. Nemo contra diabolum nisi deus ipsi, the far-spun, mysterious ego which he had so painfully woven around himself as his world, the judge, the neighbors, the fishermen, the elements, for even these took part in the play of his secretly beloved ego. The filthy slippers and his wealth had been sending him hint after hint. What more could he ask from his external mirror sphere? It had spoken to him in its own way, blow upon blow. The final release now would have to come from himself, from within, but how? It is at such a moment that the hint of a dream can be helpful, or an inkling of insight in response to the oracle of some timeless tale. For the hidden magician, who projects both the ego and its mirror world, can do more than any exterior force to unravel by night the web that has been spun by day. He can whisper, "Change your shoes," and wherewith we have only to look and see of what our slippers have been made.